The lamp is low. The rain has paused. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticks past midnight. Welcome to the late reader. Pull the blanket up. Let the dark settle in. Tonight, we read old horror by a single light until sleep finally arrives.
My great-uncle died on a Tuesday in November, on his way home from the Newport Ferry. He was 92, a professor emeritus at Brown, the kind of man who still carried a fountain pen and corrected people's pronunciation of Sumerian at dinner parties. The news said heart failure. A dock worker had bumped into him on the steep hill up from the water, and Uncle George had folded onto the sidewalk like a broken umbrella. By the time the paramedics got there, he was gone. I didn't think much of it at the time. Old man, steep hill, cold wind off the bay. That was that.
I was his closest living relative, which said more about his loneliness than it did about me. My mother had been the one he actually liked. She died 2 years earlier, and after that he'd started calling me once a month to complain about his students and the declining quality of academic journals. I'd drive down from Boston on Sundays and listen to him rant over bad coffee. So when the lawyer called, I wasn't surprised to learn I was executor. I was surprised by how much stuff there was.
He'd lived in the same house on William Street for 40 years. The walls were shelves, and the shelves were stacked with books, tablets, fragments of pottery wrapped in newspaper, boxes of index cards in his cramped handwriting. I rented a van and moved the whole archive to my apartment in Somerville because I didn't know what else to do. It took 3 trips. My roommate Brian watched me haul in the last crate and said, "Dude, you inherited a hoard." "It's not a hoard," I said. "It's a life's work. It smells like a basement." He wasn't wrong.
The box I'm talking about was small, metal, the kind of thing you'd keep cash in. I found it wedged behind a row of linguistics journals. It was locked. I spent an hour looking for the key before I thought to check the ring he'd carried in his coat pocket, the one the hospital had returned with his effects. The key fit. Inside was a clay tablet about the size of a paperback book, wrapped in a dish towel, and a stack of papers held together with a rusted binder clip. I made tea. It was midnight. I sat on the kitchen floor with the box between my knees and looked at the tablet first.
It was modern clay, not ancient. I could tell that much. But the carving on it was wrong. The surface was covered with angular symbols that looked like writing if writing had been invented by something that didn't have hands. Above the symbols was a figure. I kept trying to see it clearly and failing. It had the general shape of a man, but the head was a mass of tentacles or fingers or something in between, and there were wings folded against a body that seemed to be part squid, part dragon, part joke. The longer I looked, the less I wanted to look. I put it down and picked up the papers.
The first page was titled, in Uncle George's neat block letters, Cthulhu Cult. Under that, 2 subheadings. The first read, 2018, Dream Journal of H.A. Wilcox, 7 Thomas Street, Providence. The second read, Statement of Detective John R. LaGrasse, NOPD, 2008. I poured more tea. I read.
The Wilcox section was a transcription, almost word for word, of conversations my uncle had had with a young art student named Henry Anthony Wilcox. Henry lived in the Fleur-de-Lis building near RISD, alone, the kind of kid who wore vintage coats and talked about the collective unconscious, until people stopped inviting him to parties. On March 1st, he'd shown up at my uncle's office without an appointment, carrying the clay tablet I now had in my kitchen. It had still been damp. He said he'd made it the night before, after a dream.
My uncle's notes recorded the conversation with obvious skepticism. Henry had spoken in that overheated way art students sometimes do, about dreams older than cities, about garden-girdled Babylon and brooding Tyre. My uncle had been short with him. Then Henry had mentioned the earthquake.
There had been a small tremor in New England the night before, minor enough that most people slept through it, big enough to make the local news for half a day. Henry claimed it had cracked something open in his sleep. He'd dreamed of a city built from blocks the size of apartment buildings, all green with ooze and leaning at angles that made his eyes water. The walls were covered in the same symbols that now covered the tablet. And from somewhere beneath the city came a voice that wasn't a voice, a sound that he could only render as Cthulhu tang.
My uncle had recognized something. I couldn't tell what. His notes grew frantic after that. He'd questioned Henry for hours. He'd made him come back every day for 3 weeks to record his dreams. The entries were short and repetitive. Cyclopean architecture, basalt monoliths, a green light from below, the same 2 words recurring over and over. Cthulhu, Relie. Sometimes the voice spoke in what Henry called sense impacts, sounds that didn't translate into English but carried meaning anyway. Terror, hunger, waiting.
On March 23rd, Henry stopped coming. My uncle had called his family and learned he'd been taken home with a fever. The neighbors in his building had heard him shouting in the night. The doctor, an urgent care physician on Thayer Street named Toby, told my uncle that Henry had been raving about something miles high walking in the dark. His temperature was normal. That was the part that bothered the doctor.
On April 2nd, the fever broke. Henry woke up and didn't remember any of it. He went back to his apartment, stopped coming to see my uncle, and apparently returned to making normal, boring sculptures of hands and torsos. My uncle's notes ended with a clipped sentence. Subject reports no further anomalous dreams. Follow-up deemed unnecessary. I set that section down and looked at the clock. It was 2 a.m. The apartment was quiet except for Brian snoring down the hall and the refrigerator clicking on. I should have gone to bed.
The next section was thinner. It was my uncle's digest of a survey he'd conducted during those same weeks in March and April. He'd emailed dozens of friends, colleagues, former students, and asked them to record their dreams. Most had nothing. But the artists and poets, the ones he knew through the Providence art scene, the ones who posted their sketches on Instagram and sold chapbooks at small presses, had reported something.
From February 28th to April 2nd, a significant number of them had dreamed about cities that shouldn't exist. Not all of them saw the same thing. Some dreamed of stone doors, some of green water, some of a sound like whales screaming in a cathedral. But enough of the details matched that I felt the hair on my arms lift. One architect in Cambridge had gone into the hospital on March 23rd, the same day Henry collapsed, screaming that something was trying to crawl out of the ocean. He died 6 months later in a psychiatric facility.
At the bottom of the stack were printouts, news clips, blog posts, forum threads. My uncle had compiled them like a detective building a wall. A suicide in London. A man in Sao Paulo who wrote a 100-page manifesto about the glorious fulfillment and then burned his apartment. A theosophist colony in California that went silent for 3 days and emerged wearing white robes, waiting for a tide that never came. Unrest in Mumbai. Voodoo gatherings in Haiti. All of it clustered between late March and early April. All of it, in my uncle's marginal notes, connected by question marks and dates.
I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the kitchen floor until the sun came up and stared at the tablet. It was just clay. It was just a weird art project. But I kept thinking about Henry Wilcox waking up with clay under his fingernails and no memory of making it.
I found Henry online easily enough. His Instagram was public. In March of 2018, he'd posted blurry photos of work-in-progress sculptures, angular shapes, lots of green glaze, captions about the old dreams. After April, the posts stopped for 3 months. When he came back, he was making planters and abstract busts. I sent him a direct message. He answered the next day.
He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop on Wickenden Street. He was thinner than his photos, with dark circles under his eyes, and the kind of nervous energy that makes you want to keep your hands in your pockets. When I put the tablet on the table between us, he went very still. "Where did you get that?" "My uncle kept it. He wasn't supposed to keep it. I told him it was mine. He's dead." Henry looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached out and touched the edge of the tablet with one finger, like it was hot.
"I don't dream anymore," he said. "Not really. Since that spring it's just gray, like someone turned the color off." I asked him about the city. He shook his head. "I don't remember. The doctor said it was a stress-induced psychotic break. My parents wanted me to take a semester off. I took 2 years. But you remember something." He looked out the window. It was raining. The streetlights made wet halos on the glass.
I remember the scale, he said quietly. Everything was too big. Not tall exactly, big in a way that doesn't fit. Like the buildings were closer and farther away at the same time. And there was a door, a huge door. I kept trying to open it, and something on the other side was trying to open it too. When I woke up, my hands were raw. I'd been scratching at the floorboards. He pushed the tablet back toward me.
Your uncle thought it meant something. He thought the dreams were a broadcast, like a radio signal that only certain people could pick up. Artists, crazy people, people who stare at the ocean too long. Did you believe him? I believed I was losing my mind. He stood up and put on his coat. "Burn it, bury it, throw it in the bay. I don't care. Just don't bring it back to me." He left. I finished my coffee. I kept the tablet.
The Legrasse file was different. It wasn't notes about dreams. It was a transcript of an interview my uncle had conducted in 2008 with a New Orleans police detective named John Legrasse. Legrasse had raided a cult in the bayou south of the city and confiscated a statue that looked, in the Polaroids tucked into the file, almost exactly like the figure on the tablet.
I called the number my uncle had written in the margin. It was a landline. A woman answered, told me John couldn't hear well anymore, and passed the phone to him anyway. His voice was slow and thick, the voice of a man who had spent too many years drinking coffee in squad cars. Professor Angel's kin, he said. He told me once someone might call. He told me to be careful what I said. I have the statue's picture, I said. I have the tablet. I need to know what happened in the swamp. There was a long pause. I heard him breathing.
You come down here, he said. I ain't saying this on no phone. I flew to New Orleans on a Thursday. His daughter picked me up at the airport and drove me to a house on stilts in Metairie. John Legrasse was 84, massive, with hands that looked like they could still break a door down. He sat me at a kitchen table, covered in old case files and newspaper clippings, and poured me a glass of iced tea so sweet it hurt my teeth.
In 2008, he said, we got a call about a missing girl. Runaway. Her mama said she'd been hanging around with some weird folk out in the bayou, near Barataria. We went out there expecting a commune, meth probably. What we found was a church.
He pushed a photograph across the table. It showed a clearing in the cypress, a circle of standing stones that looked nothing like anything that should have been in Louisiana. In the center of the circle was a pedestal, and on the pedestal was the statue. The photo was grainy, taken at night with a flash, but I recognized the tentacled head, the folded wings, the impossible bulk.
There were maybe 30 people, Legrasse said. Black, white, Vietnamese, a couple of college kids from Tulane. They were all chanting. We couldn't make out the words at first. Then one of my guys got close enough to record it. He pulled an old digital recorder from a drawer and set it on the table. The battery must have been dead for years, but he didn't turn it on. He recited the words from memory, his voice dropping to a mumble, Pling Lui MGL Chuanaf. Cthulhu Relie Wagatnalgftang.
My mouth went dry. I'd seen those words in my uncle's notes, but hearing them spoken was different. The syllables felt wrong in the air, like they were pulling at something. In his house at Relie, Legrasse translated, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. He said the cultists had been repeating it for hours. When the police moved in, some of them fought, others just kept chanting. The girl they were looking for was there, unharmed, sitting at the base of the statue with her eyes open.
Stars? I asked. That's what they said. The stars. Not right now, but soon. Soon enough that he would wake up. Legrasse's team had arrested 23 people. Most served short sentences for trespassing and possession. The statue went into evidence and vanished 3 months later. Legrasse had filed a report, but no one cared. A stolen idol from a swamp cult didn't rate high on anyone's priority list.
Your uncle came down in 2009, Legrasse said. He'd heard about the case from some academic network. I showed him the photos, the recordings. He turned white. I'd never seen an old man go that color. He said the words on the statue were the same words a student of his had heard in a dream. I thought he was crazy. Now I don't know. He tapped the photo of the statue with one thick finger.
That thing in the swamp. The people who worshipped it. They weren't pretending. I've been a cop 50 years. I know what pretend looks like. They were scared, and they were happy about it. They wanted it to come back. I asked him if he still thought about it. Every night, he said. Every night I look up at the sky and wonder if the stars are right yet.
I flew back to Boston with a folder of photocopies and a feeling in my chest like I'd swallowed ice. I wanted to stop. I told myself I could stop. I had a job, an apartment, a car that needed an oil change. I had no business chasing my dead uncle's delusions. But I kept thinking about the dates. March 23rd to April 2nd, 2018. That was the window when Henry Wilcox had dreamed and burned and come apart. And across the world, in that same window, other people had lost their minds. The dates lined up too cleanly to be nothing. I started searching.
It didn't take long to find the last piece. My uncle's files had a reference number I didn't understand at first. Emma Log, 2018. Enclosure with Johansson letter. There was no enclosure in the box. I searched the van, the storage unit, my apartment. Nothing. Then I checked the inventory the lawyer had sent me. Item 47. One sealed envelope, water damaged, contents illegible, held in safe deposit box. I called the bank. They made me prove who I was 3 times. When I finally opened the safe deposit box,
The thumb drive worked. It held a single PDF, a scanned handwritten document in English, translated from Norwegian, with a note at the top, copied by Gustaf Johansson, Oslo, 2018. Original lost in storm. I read it in my apartment, with the blinds drawn.
Johansson had been first mate on a research vessel called the Emma, chartered by a Norwegian Marine Biology Institute to survey thermal vents in the South Pacific. In late March of 2018, they'd encountered a storm that shouldn't have been there. The weather models had shown clear skies. For 6 days they'd been pushed off course, the GPS failing, the stars invisible. On March 30th, they sighted another ship, a yacht called the Alert, drifting with no lights.
They boarded it. It was empty. The crew's belongings were still in their cabins, food on the table, coffee cold. The logbook ended abruptly on March 28th with a sentence in Danish, "He has been found." Then the Emma's own instruments started going strange. The depth finder showed impossible readings. The water temperature dropped 10 degrees in an hour. On the morning of March 31st, the sea in front of them simply rose into a line of black stone.
Johansson described it as an island, but an island that had no business existing. The rocks were carved, not weathered. The angles were wrong. He wrote that the horizon seemed to tilt when you looked at it, that the sea and the sky met at places where they shouldn't. They anchored in a cove that was too regular to be natural and went ashore in 2 boats. The city was waiting.
Johansson's handwriting deteriorated as the account went on. He described streets paved with stones that glowed faintly green, buildings that looked like they had been grown rather than built, a terrible humidity that smelled of fish and formaldehyde and something older. They found the door in the largest plaza. It was set flat into the stone, immense, carved with the same figure I'd seen on the tablet and in Legras's photograph.
One of the biologists, a man named Donovan, found the mechanism. The door opened inward with a sound like a whale's ribcage cracking. Darkness came out of it, not the absence of light, but a kind of smoke, a positive blackness that moved against the wind. The smell was unbearable. Then it came through. Johansson wrote that 2 of the men died before they could run, not from claws or teeth, from fear. Their hearts stopped. He saw it happen. He saw their faces.
The thing that emerged was beyond description, but he tried. A mountain of green jelly, a squid's head with arms that were miles long, wings that unfolded and blocked the sun. It moved wrong, he kept saying. It moved wrong. The geometry of it offended the eye. It was too big and too close at the same time. 3 more men were taken before the rest reached the boats. Donovan, Guerrera, Angstrom. Parker slipped on the stone and was swallowed by an angle that should have been impossible.
Johansson did the only thing he could think of. He opened the engines to full speed and turned the Emma toward the creature's head. He wrote that the impact felt like hitting a mountain made of rotting fruit. The ship's bow crumpled. A green cloud burst over the deck, blinding, stinging, smelling of graves. For a moment the thing was scattered, broken into pieces that churned and twisted in the wake.
But it was reforming. He saw it in the water behind them, the fragments drawing together like mercury, rebuilding the shape that should never have existed. The storm hit then, a wall of wind and water out of nowhere, and Johansson lost consciousness.
He woke in a hospital in Dunedin, New Zealand. The Emma had been found half sunk, its logbooks ruined, Bryden dead in his bunk from unknown causes, Johansson raving. No one believed him. The institute paid him a small pension and asked him not to talk to the press. He spent the next 6 months writing the account, then mailed it to my uncle, because my uncle was the only academic who had ever answered his emails. The PDF ended with a note Johansson had added a week before he died.
I have looked upon all the universe holds of horror. The stars were right. They will be right again. What has risen may sink, and what has sunk may rise. He waits. He dreams. We dreamed with him. I sat in the dark for a long time after I finished reading. My phone was dead. I didn't know what time it was. Outside, the city made its ordinary noises. Cars, sirens far away, a dog barking. I got up and made coffee I didn't drink.
I opened my laptop and started writing. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I put it all in order, it would make sense. The professor,
The student, the detective, the sailor, the tablet, the dreams, the city that rises and sinks. I wrote until my wrists hurt and the sun came up again. Brian found me there the next morning, still typing. "You look like hell," he said. "I'm fine. You've been fine for 3 days. You haven't been to work. You haven't eaten anything I've seen." I told him I was working through the estate. He didn't believe me, but he went to work and left me alone.
That night I dreamed for the first time in weeks. I was standing on black stone. The air was thick and green. In front of me was the door, the great barn door from Johansson's account, and it was open a crack. I could hear the voice on the other side. It wasn't speaking English. It wasn't speaking at all. It was a pressure, a sound made of hunger and patience and vast, slow triumph.
I tried to turn around. The city stretched behind me in every direction. The blocks too tall, the angles wrong. I knew, the way you know things in dreams, that I had been there before. We had all been there. Every person who woke up screaming in March of 2018, every artist who painted green cities, every cultist chanting in the swamp, they had all stood in this plaza and listened to the door. The crack widened. Something wet and enormous moved in the darkness.
I woke up gasping. My sheets were soaked, my hands hurt. I turned on the light and saw clay under my fingernails, dark and damp, still smelling of the bay. On my desk, next to the tablet, was a new shape, small, crude, still wet. I don't remember making it. I don't know how I could have. It was a figure, inches tall, with too many arms and a head like a flower of grasping fingers. Behind it, scratched into the clay with a thumbnail, were words in a language I had never learned but somehow almost understood.
I picked it up. It was cold. The refrigerator clicked off, and in the sudden quiet I heard something from the alley below my window, a thick, dragging sound, like something heavy pulling itself across wet pavement. I didn't look. I put the little figure on the shelf beside the tablet, sat back down at my laptop, and kept writing. The sky outside was turning gray. The stars were not visible. They didn't need to be. They would be right again, soon enough. And when they were, I wanted there to be a record, even if no one believed it.
I saved the file. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark and listened to the wet sound in the alley moving slowly away.
The story closes here, but the quiet does not. Another night waits on the shelf, its pages already yellowing. When the light is low again, we will return. For now, let the window hold the dark. Let the mirror hold only you. Sleep well, late reader.